Hey guys, welcome back to the Binge Free Bestie Podcast. I'm Nic, I'm your host. I am a registered therapist here in New Zealand. And today I am really excited about this episode because I have one of my besties joining me and one of my colleagues in the field. That is Dr. Chelsea Arnold over from Perth, right? In Australia.
Just in Adelaide, but I did used to live in Perth.
You've told me that like 3 times. Okay,
Adelaide.
Well, welcome to the podcast. I'm really excited for this one because I think what you are doing for the recovery community is just amazing, and I can't wait to hear about, what you've created, and I'm sure the Besties community are excited about it too once they hear what you've been doing. And yeah, just to get to know you a little bit better. And the purpose of our chat today as well is we're going to be talking about kind of the pros and cons of either tracking, which is kind of the naughty dark side, and self-monitoring, which is actually something that would be really helpful in a recovery journey, especially when it comes to binge eating, which is what we're all about here on this podcast. How about to start off our chat, just let us know a little bit about you and let the listeners know what you get up to in the world.
Thanks, Nic. I'm so excited to be here talking about this with you. So my name's Chelsea. I am a clinical psychologist and researcher over here in Adelaide. And I am also recently the co-founder of a mobile app called Bertie to support binge eating recovery. So a few different hats that I wear. Also a mum to a little girl called Bertie. That's the actual namesake of the app.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's cute.
Yeah, that's how we found the name. And a busy mum that wears different hats. And yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Love that. Love a multi-passionate woman.
So many passions.
Yeah, I feel like society sometimes makes us feel like we're too scattered or we're trying too hard to do too many things. But I think there's something so powerful about having multiple things that light you up. And I love that you're doing multiple things.
Thank you. Sometimes it does feel a little bit scattered, I will say. I might be spreading myself a little bit too thin, something I'm always working on. But like you said, when I have these passions, I really do try to follow them. So unfortunately, that just makes me a very busy person.
Me too. I'm exactly the same. Like everyone always says, like, why are you always working on so many projects? And I think like what you were just saying, when I'm passionate about something, I just want to bring it alive. I want to bring it to life. And especially when I see that there's something missing in the community, especially something that's going to be empowering for other people and helpful. And I think, our mental health system, as we were just discussing before the podcast, has so many gaps in it. And we have some expertise in this field. We can see a gap, and we also have some ideas about how we might be able to fill those gaps. So I think that it's kind of ideas come to us for a reason, and maybe we should act on them. That's
Definitely.
my ethos.
Totally. And something I'm really passionate about, and I'm sure we'll get into this on the podcast, is getting access to evidence-based information and treatment out to as many people as possible. I think, as I mentioned before, I'm a psychologist. Psychology is a very gate-kept profession. The Australian Psychological Society suggests, I think, psychologists charge about $300 an hour. Obviously, you get some of that back on your rebate, but it's not accessible to the majority of people. So that's something I'm really passionate about, is that enabling people to have access to treatments that work, because we know there's a lot of misinformation out there, unfortunately.
Yes, definitely. And I think when it comes to eating disorders, disordered eating, healthy lifestyles, mindset hacks, like all of that kind of stuff, there are so many people talking and giving ideas, strategies, running programs, some people are qualified and know what they're talking about, but maybe they're not accessible. And some people are totally not qualified and pulling stuff out of thin air or using AI, or, they're not actually grounded, and what they're sharing isn't necessarily backed up by the literature. So I love that that's something that you are doing. You're making sure that what you're creating is backed by science and it's going to work.
Yeah, well, certainly that's our hope, and sharing that with as many people as possible.
Yeah, awesome. So I thought a really interesting kind of angle for our chat today would be to talk about, like I said before, tracking. And kind of, I think a good place to start might be talking about, you're a psychologist, you're working with women who are struggling in their relationship with food and eating in their bodies. And I'm sure that most people who walk through your door are doing some form of tracking or have been tracking, whether that's tracking calories, macros, weighing themselves, weighing their food, measuring, all of that MyFitnessPal kind of shenanigans. We are taught to do that by diet culture. And again, like these coaches and creators that we see online who are doing that and making what I eat in a day videos and, telling us that this is how you can manage your binge eating or manage your relationship with food. But I'm curious, what kind of impact are you seeing on the people who walk through your door who are participating in those tracking behaviors?
Yeah, I think you raise a really good point, Nick, that tracking has become like one of those really big trends in our current kind of diet culture. It's not just tracking calories anymore. It's tracking macros and micros, I think might even be a thing. Like, I'm not really across the whole culture, to be honest, but people feel a pressure to track what they eat to make sure that they're abiding by certain calorie restrictions and certain macro kind of or nutrient restrictions as well. For some people that may be fine. That may not kind of result in disordered eating. However, for those of us that might be more vulnerable, say we have potential low body image issues or we've had some issues with eating in the past, tracking our calories and our nutrients can be a bit of a slippery slope, in my opinion, and certainly the literature would support that as well. Because when we're tracking, it's kind of getting into that black and white thinking. We need to be following particular rules about what we can and can't eat. We need to be meeting certain targets. And I think certainly calorie and nutrient tracking for somebody that might be more vulnerable to eating related issues, or you might have had an issue with that in the past, has got the potential to definitely be contributing to some eating related issues, whether that be binge eating or another type of eating issue, for sure.
Yeah. So like you just said, so there is evidence and you're seeing real world impact that tracking is fueling things like disordered eating or binge eating disorder.
And having these rigid rules, as we know, the binge restrict cycle is one of the kind of main factors that maintains binge eating. And I'm sure you've probably spoken about this on the podcast before. In my mind, tracking is another form of restriction. We're restricting how many calories we can eat. We're restricting the types of food that we can eat, the food groups, the macros, that type of thing. And I think for the individual, this type of behavior where we have to track everything and meet targets, there's a few issues with that because it's promoting this rigidity and obsessive kind of thinking that we know is a big red flag for issues like binge eating. And I think it can also be instilling in us a kind of almost competitiveness. I need to be meeting this goal. It's very goal oriented. And I think probably slipping into that categorization of foods as good or bad, that type of thing. So definitely for women that have struggled before, or struggling with binge eating, I'm sure most, particularly women who have struggled with binge eating, have probably tried every diet out there and have probably been counting calories in all different forms for many a time, unfortunately.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, most of the women that I'm supporting, they've been tracking themselves in some way or form for years and years, even back into like childhood when their mum left like the Weight Watchers. You remember those little like calorie books, point books and stuff that they used to have back, the hard copies, like in the 90s, early
Yes.
2000s. And I remember like seeing those laying around the house and having it look and be like, ah, okay, so I can't eat that. That's the naughty food. That's the bad food. Okay, ice cream is X amount of points. Glass of Coke is X amount of points. Okay, and just over time, you've got this kind of, I guess, programming in the back of your head where you may not even be totally aware that you're doing it, but you're constantly tallying things up. So it's a really hard thing to rewire, isn't it? Because it's
Yeah.
years and years of conditioning.
I was going to say, for women that have been calorie counting for years and years, it can be quite difficult, in my experience of working here, to unlearn those associations, because over time you learn how many Weight Watchers points, or you learn how many calories are in X amount of food. You don't need to go look it up at one step, after a certain amount of times, because oh, that has X amount of calories. So
Exactly.
it's all about that categorization of good or bad foods. I can have this. I can't have that because it will put me over my points. It will put me over my calories. So I would put calorie counting and nutrient counting as a form of restriction. It's just
Yes.
a different type. It's all part of the same diet culture, which we know is the main thing that fuels issues like binge eating.
Yes, totally. And if you guys have been listening to past episodes, something that I talk about a lot, and I also talk about it in my kind of freebie guide that you can get. It's called the Emotional Eaters Fix, and I've kind of given it that name just to, I mean, some people don't identify with the word binge eating. That's why I called it emotional eating. But really what I talk about in that is that there's three big drivers behind binge eating. The first one is physical restriction, which is you're not eating enough. You're not eating regularly. You're not eating adequately. You're not eating with enough variety. Okay. So that's like the calorie restricted eating. But there's also mental restriction, which is exactly what you're just talking about around that categorization and moralization of food. So good, bad, clean, junk. When we label our foods like that, we are giving them a moral standing, and we feel like if we eat the bad or the naughty or the junky food, then that in turn kind of puts us in that category too, God forbid. So yes, it's a slippery slope, isn't it? You've got physical restriction, mental, and the third one is that emotional dysregulation.
And I feel like sorry to interrupt, Nick. I feel like diet culture is getting sneaky as well. So it might not be as explicit as, oh, chocolate cake is bad. I can't have that. But, currently I feel like everywhere I turn, I see we've got to have extra protein. Everything's
Oh
about
my God, it's such a
adding
thing right now.
protein to literally every single type of food has to have added protein in it, because that
It's another
is
thing
being
for
labeled as
sex.
healthy or good. I think there's some really great dietitians on Instagram doing some work about it's okay to not have food with added protein in it. Carbohydrates are important. Other food groups are important. So that type of macro counting as well, or, are we getting, I've used my Fitness Pal in the past and it's like, oh no, I'm not getting this huge chunk of pie in my protein thing, and I need to be putting less calories into my diet. So yeah, I think that it can be quite subtle and sneaky, those ways in which diet culture infiltrates the messaging. And then we're thinking, oh, we're doing a bad job. We're going to be more likely to restrict our types of food intake as well. So we just end up eating lean chicken and green beans or something, which is not very enjoyable as
No,
a
and
full
then
diet.
obviously what happens, we end up binging on the foods that have been forbidden from our diet, because you cannot survive, and you should not be surviving on a diet of bland ass chicken and beans, because eventually you will crack, you'll have a shitty day at work, life will happen, curveballs will happen, and you will probably use some food to serve, which is actually okay sometimes. Like, food is allowed to be part of your celebrations, it's allowed to be part of your commiserations, but obviously we don't want that to be your only tool. But yes, when we're restricting, we're using these apps like MyFitnessPal, or we're using these programs like WW, which is that's their new name, isn't it? WW.
You keep branding.
Trying to rebrand. You can't
I did
fool.
hear that Weight Watchers are actually going under now.
Oh, and Jenny Craig's died, hasn't it? The
Yeah.
whole. So
So
that's fabulous.
it's positive in that regard, although I've seen the kind of narrative shifting because it's now those programs of it kind of being superseded by the next kind of diet fad, which is weight loss injections and things like that, which is a whole other topic that, probably deserves another in-depth chat.
Yes,
I also
definitely.
really like what you said before, Nic, that it's okay to emotionally eat
Yes.
sometimes. I love
No,
that you
you
kind of
shouldn't.
brought that in. We all use food to soothe at times. That's completely healthy, normal. I don't like to use the term normal, but that's a completely healthy and appropriate thing that is just what we want to do. That's completely fine. And I don't want people to think that we can't use food in that kind of way. It's more like, as you've probably discussed in your podcast before, when we only have the option to turn to emotional eating, or only have the option to turn to binge eating to self-soothe, that we might be wanting to have a look at things and see if there's potential for us to make changes.
Exactly. So, okay, so far we've touched on, binge eating, we've talked about tracking and how it's so insidious. Diet culture has created and propagated this thing, right? Obviously, it's going through a bit of a shift and change right now, and sometimes it can be really hard to recognize that it is even harmful. I mean, wellness culture really is diet culture in disguise, I think. So make sure that you are looking through a critical lens at anything that's popping up on your socials, or when you're listening in on a conversation at work and people talking about their new wellness lifestyle, have a filter on that. But so we know that when you are tracking, it can lead to binge eating because of that mental restriction as well as the physical restriction. That is a fact. We know that. So, what I want to turn the conversation to then is the idea of something called self monitoring. So, self monitoring is a strategy and a part of the treatment approach for binge eating. It's part of something called cognitive behavioral therapy enhanced, so CBT-E. This is an evidence-backed model that is used by binge eating therapists around the world. There is so much evidence backing up that this works. It also is really cool because you can do this by yourself. You can self-guide yourself through CBT-E, and you can use self-monitoring to go through your own recovery journey. Obviously, as we know with binge eating, it is a lot harder to go through any recovery journey on your own. Like, it is great if you can have a community or you can find a therapist. But what we're going to talk about now is Chelsea's kind of baby that she's developed, the Bertie app, because if you aren't able to find a community, although you are in a community, if you're listening to this podcast, you're part of the Besties community, you've got us now. But if you don't feel like you have anyone in your world and you're not able to access a therapist, we want you to know that there are still things that you can do on your own. One of them is the act of self-monitoring, and the Bertie app is something that can support you to do that because it's one of the kind of aspects of the app, right? So maybe tell us a bit about the app and its functions and its purpose, and we can talk a bit more about how self-monitoring aids in recovery.
Yeah. So, like you said, obviously, if you have access to a therapist that can guide you through your own recovery, that's ideal in a lot of circumstances. So, the Australian Psychological Society, the APS, have actually endorsed self-guided CBT through digital technologies like app as a first-line evidence-based treatment. So, it's as effective for a lot of people as face-to-face therapies, which is great because it means that we can get evidence-based treatment, as we were talking about before, available to more people. So with that in mind, my partner and I created the Bertie app, which is based on CBT-E. CBT enhanced, but then I like to enhance it a little bit more with my own flair about some limitations of CBT that I personally consider. But one of the main things that we know is very effective for people that are trying to overcome issues with binge eating is to target this restriction that occurs. And a way that we can do that is by self-monitoring. So monitoring our intake and then also aiming to restore regular eating as well. So with self-monitoring, I've found previously when I've suggested people do some self-monitoring, often women are like, oh, hell no, because I've done the calorie counting my whole life. They're like, absolutely not. That's not going to work for me, which
I've
makes
had the
sense.
same response of people being like, what the heck? I thought you were like anti-diet. I thought that what are you telling me to do this? This is the opposite of anti-diet, isn't it? I'm like, no, self-monitoring is different. Trust me.
Which totally makes sense because we don't want to be just adding more fuel to the fire. I would never want to be, encouraging somebody to be counting their calories in the part of their recovery journey. So in contrast to calorie counting, which we know kind of fuels that obsessiveness, that restriction, and is about restraint and restriction, self-monitoring, I would kind of describe it as more of a reflection about your food and drink experiences. So in real time, it is a big undertaking. So I do want to validate that. When you're starting out with self-monitoring, it does involve in real time recording what you eat every time you kind of eat and drink. And obviously that's a big commitment. So I want to validate that it is, a lot of work, particularly at the start when you're kind of getting used to it. Clients do report that after I'd say a week or two, they're really in the flow of monitoring. Christopher Fairburn, who developed CBT, would say you have to use a pen and paper to monitor everything you eat. I personally don't think that's a viable option for most people to carry around a notebook, at
He's
work. You're like, sorry.
He's a
I
bit
have
old.
to, yeah.
He's great, but a lot of the original kind of overcoming binge eating CBT approach is like quite outdated in many ways. But yeah,
Bit rigid as well, in my personal opinion. So what self-monitoring would involve is in real time reflecting on your experience about eating and drinking, what you're consuming, but also about your broader experience. What am I thinking? What am I feeling? Where am I? Who am I with? And you do that for all of your meals and snacks. The reason why this can be really helpful, because it's really not about any form of restriction. We're not counting calories. We are inviting people to reflect on their experience. So it's helpful because in the moment, it brings awareness to what's going on for you. We can't change what we don't have awareness about. So I think that's a really, really important element. You can say, hey, is this apple going to be enough for me as a meal? What's going on for me that I'm feeling that I need to restrict, or what's going on for me that I feel that I need to act in a particular type of way? The other fantastic thing about self-monitoring when we do it consistently is that we can build up awareness of our patterns of behavior over time. So a common kind of archetype of somebody that's binge eating would be to be really, really good during the day and restrict, maybe not eat any breakfast, have a black coffee, limit calories to quite an extreme during the day, and then binge eat in the evening at home alone, hypothetically, as an example. And so we may be stuck in that pattern, but not necessarily have a clear overview of the pattern that we're in. And so we do self-monitoring. We can say, hey, look, at this week, I didn't eat anything all day. And I can see that my emotions and thoughts were really negative in the evening, and then I binged. So it's a really cool way to bring awareness in the moment about your experience, but over time as well. Like I said, if we don't have awareness, we can't start to make changes.
Exactly. And that's what I say in the breakup as well. So the very first kind of thing that we tackle in my program is getting in that regular eating. And well, actually, the first thing I try to do is dismantle diet culture and say, like, it's time to hit pause on the tracking. Trust me in this process. We're going to do, I call it an eating awareness tracker, and you're going to track what you're eating, what you're drinking, how hungry you are or full, where you're eating, why, what thoughts and feelings you are having. And we're not doing this to police ourselves, because the thing is, of course, that's what we've been doing for years. Anytime we've been asked to track our food, it's always been to police ourselves. It's been to kind of reinforce that either we're doing good on the diet, or it shows us that we're screwing up and we're doing terribly and we need to start again. This is a totally new thing where I'm saying, how about let's come in with curiosity, lots of self-compassion, and just try it for a few weeks. And I want you to look for your patterns, because like you just said, once you see your patterns and you can see it on paper or in an app saying like, oh, actually, I didn't actually eat that much today. Or when I look across the span of a week, maybe I didn't binge until day 4, but I notice days 1, 2, and 3, I ate very little. So by day 4, that's when I fell off the wagon and had the binge. But now it makes sense because I can see it all laid out in front of me. And, Nic has told me one of the biggest drivers to binge eating is physical restriction. And sometimes a lot of clients are resistant to that because they're like, well, but I'm not restricting, I am eating. But when you see it there, you're like, oh, maybe I'm not quite eating enough. Maybe that did lead to the binge. Oh my God, light bulb moment. And then you can actually start working on it.
Yeah, exactly. Because like I've said before, we don't have the awareness, we can't make the changes. Or maybe, we have awareness that we are restricting, but we don't know the full extent, or we don't know the nuances. So it can really provide, I love what you called it, like your eating awareness kind of experience, because it can really help us get that objective information. Because sometimes when we're struggling with binge eating, we can have our kind of blinkers on. We're really in it. And this can help us to step back and see things a little bit more objectively and a little bit more clearly. It's not going to
Totally.
be the full picture. There's obviously a lot of other things that we need to do, but it's a really, in my opinion, a fantastic starting point.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree, because once we know, okay, maybe I'm not eating enough, and, the recommendation with binge eating is to get on top of that regular eating first. And so, I mean, what do you have to say around that in terms of why does working on that regularity of eating enough, eating different types of food, like why does that actually support people to reduce their binges?
So we know that, as I mentioned before, that restrict binge cycle is one of the main reinforcing factors for binge eating, because as you say, eventually we fall off the wagon and then we vow to do better the next day because we got to diet harder, basically. Basically, if we just think about physical restriction in the first place, as we restrict, as we don't give our body the fuel it needs, this physiological, aka hunger, physical hunger builds. Obviously, that makes sense. But so does the I'm a psychologist, so obviously I focus on the psychological aspects. So does that psychological pressure to eat. What we restrict ourselves of becomes more and more what we are focused in on. It takes up all of our mental capacity. So the more we restrict, our physiological and our psychological hunger is building and building and building, bubbling away in the background. Maybe we can not act on it at some stage, but it takes a hell of a lot of our energy, our mindset, our efforts, so that we're not out there living a joyful, engaged life because we're focusing on keeping
Yes.
that at bay. until it becomes overwhelming and we have to eat on it. We have to act on it. And then, of course, because our body is in that starvation response, we physiologically, naturally overeat as a starvation response. Yeah. So that's kind of one of the main reasons. What we deprive ourselves of becomes more of our focus psychologically, and we have this just natural, it's a survival instinct to eat when you're hungry.
Exactly. And I think that's like, I've noticed this a lot on the socials of the Bertie page. And I put it out a lot on mine as well. It's like, you are not broken. You're not doing anything wrong. It's not that you have no willpower. You're not weak. Your body wants to survive, and your body is doing its job. It's responding to that restriction. When you binge and you overeat, it is because your body is doing what it needs to do to keep you around.
Exactly.
You know? So it's not any moral failing. It's not that there's anything wrong with you that you couldn't stick to the diet. It's that your body went into that survival mode, as you said, and it's doing what it needs to do.
And I completely agree. And I also really want to validate that it is a symptom of our culture that we're in, that people feel the need to restrict. It's, I feel like there's a strong narrative around, it's not your fault if you binge. It's not a lack of willpower, but I also want to validate and bring compassion to it's not your fault if you're restricting also, because we are conditioned from day one that we enter this world. You talk about this a lot, Nic, to be thin, to be small, to not take up space, to eat less. And so it's a societal problem. It's not an individual issue.
No, exactly. Wholeheartedly agree. And so that's kind of the work, or the mahi, we say in New Zealand, the mahi that we're doing in the world, is to raise that awareness and to give you guys tools like the self-monitoring so that you can bring to light those patterns and you can come to understand where your binge eating is coming from so that you can actually take some action. Because once you do know what your patterns are, once you do know where it's coming from, it does start to sit with you a little more in taking that responsibility for your own recovery and for your own healing journey. And if you need support in that, that is exactly why we exist and why we're here. And we're both so passionate about supporting you in your recovery journey, but no one else can do it for you. And so it takes a lot of courage to do something like self-monitoring, because it is scary and it's confronting. I know when I first tried doing it, I felt terrible for the first week, because it really put in front of my face like the reality of what I was dealing with and how vast it was and how out of control I felt like I was. And then it feels like a mountain was going to need to be climbed. But as you guys know, if you listen and you've heard a bit of my story, like I haven't binged since 2019. So that's like nearly 6 years. It's not to say that my old binge brain doesn't try to speak up sometimes. She's still in the back there. Like, we're living in this culture, as Charles said, like we are constantly bombarded with messages, and it will light up that little voice in the back of your head from time to time, but you will get stronger and you will be able to snap back at it. You'll be able to challenge it. You'll be able to engage your self-care plan and use all your strategies, and it won't be a big deal and it won't throw you off. So happy to say I haven't binged in, coming up to 6 years, which is awesome. And recovery is like a lifetime thing, as with kind of many different struggles that people have. There's no finish line, but it isn't a mountain that's never going to be, you can get there, is what I'm trying to say.
Yes. And, I think your experience, Nic, is a testament to the fact that we know that these treatments work. I think at the start, like you said, it can be really confronting, particularly the first week or two if you're changing tact and you are really tuning into self-monitoring or bringing awareness to this. It's very, very typical for people to feel like, okay, I thought I was going to feel better, but I'm feeling like pretty overwhelmed by this. So I think it's great to validate that. We expect that it could be pretty rocky the first week or two, or even a few weeks longer, but it does get better. We kind of do need to face, we got to feel it to heal it, got to face our fears to kind of move through them as well.
Agree with that wholeheartedly. And so how do people get their hands on the Bertie app? Like, where do they find it? Does it cost anything? Like, what's the deal here?
The deal is it's free on the App Store. App Store and Google Play. So you can just search in the App Store or Google Play Store, Bertie Binge Eating Recovery, and it should come up. It's currently, what are we in 2025? It's currently free for now. And so, yeah, I think it's an amazing resource that you should take advantage of if it would be helpful for you. Like I said before, we really want to get this evidence-based intervention out to as many people as possible. And as I mentioned previously, it's based on CBT, but there are some, I like to put my own flair on things. So if you've done maybe some CBT before and more of that traditional format, like Nic was saying, and found this wasn't really for me, we have elements of emotion regulation, like there's an SOS button for those really tricky times. I've got self-compassion and mindfulness kind of weaved through there as well. So I wanted to have a multimodal, multi-pronged approach, so that it's not just based on CBT, but that we know that also have those evidence-based interventions integrated in there as well.
Yeah, and I can vouch for this because I've had Bertie installed on my phone for, I don't know how long, the last couple of months, at least 2 months I've had it on there. And like just before we came on this call, Bertie told me to eat my lunch. And I was like, oh, actually, I should eat my lunch because I know that it's probably going to be, I don't know, an hour and a half or 2 hours before I get an opportunity to sit down and give myself some fuel. So you know what? It is a good time to eat, and it helped me to prioritize my eating well today, which is awesome. And it vibrates, I think it's your breakfast, lunch, dinner, and then snacks as well.
Mm-hmm.
Set up the notification so it reminds you to eat, and then you can log it, which I think is awesome. And if that's all you use the app for, I think that would be just an amazing place to start. But then you've also got everything else sitting in there too, and it's free. So I would recommend guys
No-brainer.
download it, have a play with it, have a little go at self-monitoring, and just see if it might help you to see those patterns and gain some awareness on where you're at in your relationship with food and eating right now. And then, of course, you can decide what you want to do from there, whether you want to come join the breakup, whether you want to do one of my coaching programs, whether you want to reach out to Chelsea. There's options because you know what you're dealing with.
Yeah. I think it's a great first place to start and give it a try. Yeah. I feel like for those who are struggling, the listeners that might be struggling, I don't feel like there's any harm in giving this a try if you haven't done something like this already. Or even if you have, we know sometimes recovery takes a few goes. So I guess, I would really urge you to download the app, give it a try. It might not be for you, but you don't have anything to lose at this stage.
Yeah, and I can also vouch, like, obviously Chelsea's created it. Chelsea knows what she's doing. It's a safe app to be using. If you want to do self-monitoring, I don't recommend doing it on something like MyFitnessPal or anything like that. Just download Bertie. It's safe. You can go in there and know that it's not going to be infiltrated by diet culture.
There's no diet culture on the app, that is sure. It's an evidence-based intervention developed by me as a psychologist. So, yeah.
That's amazing. Well, I think that's the perfect place to pause this conversation, but I feel like we possibly have many more conversations that we could have for the Besties community. You've got a wealth of knowledge, and I would love to have the opportunity to pick your brain a little bit more in the future if you're open to it.
That would be my absolute pleasure.
Awesome. Okay, well, I will definitely hit you up on that. And so everyone, Bessie's listening, definitely check out Bertie. I will pop the details in the show notes so that you can go and give it a download and have a bit of a play and a bit of an experiment. And I will catch you next week for the next episode. Enrollments for the breakup are open now, so if that's something you're feeling like you're ready to dive into, the invitation is there. But until then, I'll be back next week and I will catch you later. See you guys.